What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the Pick Swap Media YouTube channel, or those of you listening through the airwaves on Fox Sports The Gambler for hour 2 right here on the Tough Cover Radio Show. We got a lot more Paul George and Sixers to talk about, and with me to break it down, I have a very special guest. He is a load management and Stan hater. He is a basketball nut and historian. He is a lover of all things LA sports. He's the host of the Locked On Clippers podcast, as well as the Dime Dropper podcast. I have him with me to break things down, talk a lot of Paul George and this bizarre, just kind of, world that we're living in which the Clippers and Sixers seem to be swapping players. So, Mr. Dime Dropper himself, how we doing, sir?
Oh, thanks, Sean. That was a great intro. And I'm doing okay. I'm doing pretty well after having you on my channel to preview the Knicks Sixers series. Nice to, come back on your channel and talk about it on this platform. So, Paul George, man, it is really insane what you're talking about. Like the amount of Clippers Sixer crossover recently has just been crazy. Tobias Harris, Nico Batum, Robert Covington, James Harden, Paul George. I mean, am I forgetting any?
We can even go back to the Doc Rivers, JJ Redick, Mo Bamba, even in the mix here. There's a lot going on. So
Mike
it's certainly,
Scott.
yeah, Mike Scott. Shout out to Mike Scott Hive. A ton of turnover. So it is kind of interesting that obviously two teams basically on the opposite sides of the country there in Los Angeles and Philadelphia. And there is this kind of connection here. But shout out to Dime Dropper. He did have me on previewing that Knicks series. Helped me, I think, grow to my number one most hated person in New York Knicks circles, which I wear with pride and have everything bookmarked for the comeback this year. So I'm excited for that as well. Not taking any bit of that back, but I do want to talk a little bit about this Paul George situation as a whole. I've seen some of your content and know a little bit of kind of your feelings coming in on this. But I think the question that I want to open with you for is coming from the Philadelphia angle and the Sixers specific kind of just mindset here. It didn't feel like it was real until it was for me. So I want to know from your angle, from the Clipper side of things, when did you start to really realize like Paul George might actually be leaving?
Well, I thought if he was going to be leaving, it would be going to Golden State. And I've only started to feel like that within the last 3 weeks. I was pretty sure Paul George was going to try to retire as a member of the Clippers. I thought he wanted to be here for life. That's what he said over and over again. His home, his parents get to watch him play on a nightly basis. And it's tough to go away from home. It really is. And I thought he'd be willing to take pay cuts and stuff like that to stay with Kawhi because he asked to come here. And yeah, the Sixers thing, I would say just a couple of days before it happened because I had one of our beat writers on and he even said to me he thinks that Golden State was the only option. He didn't think that Paul George would pack his bags like that. And so the fact that there was another stop left in Paul George's career in Philadelphia, going back to the Eastern Conference, never in a million years did I think that would happen. But when you saw the contract, you were like, man, I mean, can you blame him? Like, that's a lot of money. So, and you can say he has a better chance of winning a championship there. The only thing about Paul George that I hold against him is that within the last 2 years, he has consistently devalued championship and his desperation for it as a guy with 0 rings. And that made me very angry as a fan. And I know that's not going to go over well with Philly if he doesn't watch what he says.
Yeah, and I do want to dig into that specifically a little bit here because there's certainly been some comments that have come out through the podcast P platform and a couple other things. That one isn't exactly what I want to hear as kind of a mindset type thing of I don't need a guy to be watching film on Stephen A. Smith and Ryan Clark at this point in his career. Maybe let's watch a little, guys that could help you on the basketball court is certainly something. But I do respect it from Paul George's mindset that he is stepping into a high pressure situation here. Like he certainly can't be blind to that. I think I would even argue this is going to be the most pressure that has ever been on him on a basketball court when you think to his situation in Indiana, where he was still young and while he was the guy and certainly brought that team along with him on some really impressive runs, going head to head with LeBron in that type of era. Then OKC, where it was kind of like a little bit of an in-between zone for what are the expectations here, a little bit of like not a long-term destination. Then in LA, like I don't think the pressure was still quite on him, with all respect to the Clippers. And to be perfectly honest, I much prefer watching the Clippers than the Lakers there, but it's certainly the Lakers that are the primary storyline that is brought up there. So I think he lived in that shadow a little bit. Here in Philadelphia, it's going to be front and center that everything's on you, the pressure's on you. And from your eyes and seeing the Paul George experience overall, how do you think that is going to overall translate?
Well, I would say this. I agree with the Sixers is the biggest franchise he's played for, and it'll probably have the most it'll be the most pressure on him. But I just don't think that the Clippers situation was anything close to the Pacers or the Oklahoma City Thunder for this reason, is because even though we are the Clippers, ever since we got Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, We've had 30 plus nationally televised games. We have had
Sure.
we're never going on NBA TV in the playoffs. You know what I'm saying? We're going to be there. We have a sellout streak, and CP3 and Blake Griffin were, two of the biggest stars in the NBA at the time. But I think the reason why the Paul George era actually did have a lot of scrutiny in LA is because, one, it is still LA, and two, he joined at the same time that Anthony Davis joined the Lakers. So in that first season, while out east, it was the talk about the Sixers. We were talking about it a little bit pre-recording, but getting Al Horford and having that team, and then
Uh-huh.
the Celtics having Kyrie and Gordon Hayward. I'm sorry, Kemba Walker and those guys, and Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. But out west, that whole summer was about it's LA versus LA, and they're going to go to the conference finals. And it was this close to happening until the Clippers blew a 3-1 lead against the Denver Nuggets. All season long, it was set up for
Shout
that.
out Doc
So
Rivers.
right. There was
Yeah.
nowhere for Paul to hide. And then the following season, I mean, you remember, anybody that was around basketball social media remembers after the bubble, pandemic P. I mean, it was terrible. Like it was
Yeah.
just playoff P. So when he redeemed himself against the Jazz the following year, it was amazing. And then I just think he hasn't really had the chance these last two seasons to be in the proper spotlight in the playoffs because Kawhi has been hurt. But this season, I mean, everybody was watching that Dallas series and we all saw the way he played.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this will be the most pressure, but I do think he has faced a lot of it, the Clippers. So I don't think it'll be that different, to be honest.
Okay.
I just think the fans are going to be on top of him more. That's the
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah, I definitely think that is the case, and excellent points there. So you kind of mentioned the Kawhi and Paul George era in Los Angeles. Obviously, injuries are the obvious answer here, but if I had to ask you what is the biggest reason that things did not work, what else would you say there?
Wow, what else? It's just crazy because number one is so clearly injuries.
Yeah,
But I think Paul George not being, I wouldn't say not who I thought he was because I kind of had a suspicion of who he was when he, didn't quite play well enough, in my opinion, in those two series when he was with the Thunder. He played that Thunder team, and Westbrook doesn't get off the hook for that either. But
sure.
they lost to the Utah Jazz, who had just lost Gordon Hayward and had a rookie leading them. Like you're two guys that have been in the league for a while. Westbrook's averaging a triple double. And then the Thunder fans are telling me they lost because Andre Roberson was hurt. Like, come on, like that's just not good enough for me. I know what Roberson was doing back then, but come on. And then the following year, you get 4-1 by Portland. Essentially, CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard and was Enes Kanter were the only guys that you could go get a bucket on that team. Like you could actually throw it to Enes Kanter, ask him to get a bucket. And besides that, it was all Dame and CJ. And while the Thunder didn't have many shot creators, like you have Westbrook and Paul George. And Paul George, I know he was struggling with the shoulders and whatnot. My point is, I was a little suspect on him. And I think all my doubts were realized as a member of the Clippers. Like he's very inconsistent for a star. I think the
Yeah,
one thing you expect out of an all-star is consistency. You're not a role player. And what also hurts about Paul George is his quotes. The way he talks about himself is inconsistent. In one moment, he says he's okay doing the dirty work. He's down to be more of a glue guy because Kawhi is so clearly the number one. He said on his podcast, Kawhi is the number one, and I'm okay being a number two. As a Sixer fan, I wouldn't care too much about that comment because he's going to be number three now, which is the best
right.
possible scenario. But it's always kind of ducking responsibility. It's always the thing is they needed a point guard. Kawhi and Paul George, I'd say to answer your question, Kawhi and Paul George seem to need a point guard their entire time in Los Angeles. And the Celtics, for example, they did bring in a Drew Holiday, but Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum were creating most of the shots for the
Sure.
team. And it's okay to not want to do that, but them constantly trying to recycle different guys till we got one. I think it just is a reflection of Paul George. Kawhi should get some heat for it too, but at least Kawhi's consistent about what he wants and he performs well every night. Paul George's the excuses, I mean, it was a lot.
Interesting. Yeah, that was interesting. I wasn't the direction I would have expected there, but that makes sense to me for sure. And I guess a question that I did want to make sure I hit you with here. So, in theory, Paul George just re-signs this contract, comes back to the Clippers. A lot of the talk and a lot of like the reasoning I kind of ultimately expected the Clippers to just roll over and give him that final year, and we're not having this conversation as a whole right now, is because of this new arena opening up was something that was constantly pushed to me. Do you guys, as like Clippers fans, would you have felt super optimistic about this team if they had just run it back and kept with the same core, added a few pieces with Paul George back? Would that have been enough to be buy back in from a fan base perspective next year?
No, not at all. And I don't
No.
think this is getting people bought back in, but I will say this. I think there is a level of excitement in the sense that it's something different and we knew that wasn't going to work. The thing is, I don't think we got better, but
Yeah.
it's different. And at this point, we're choosing how to lose because the biggest problem with the Clippers right now with our team is that Kawhi Leonard's injured all the time when it counts. And there's nothing you can do. And well, if anybody can somewhat relate, you guys can. The difference is Embiid is injured but still plays, just doesn't necessarily always look like this the Embiid we see in the regular season. But Kawhi Leonard straight up just doesn't really play enough in the playoffs. So yeah, that's the biggest problem. So no, the fan base, a lot of them still want the team to blow it up. I'm one of those people, but it's
Okay.
just very hard because we don't have the draft capital. So I think we're going to go the cap space route after this era is over, which will probably be another year or two, at most 3 years. They're saying the summer of 2027 is when they want to go all in because we don't have the picks. So we got to use what we can, which is LA, the beautiful new stadium, and a good owner that wants to win as the selling point. And you know what? I'm pretty confident that people for the foreseeable future and in my life, if Ballmer's the owner, will want to come to the Clippers. I just think, I don't know. This
Yeah.
might have been a little bit of a rough look, but at the same time, I think people will realize that that's a lot of money. And you got to blame the new CBA, if anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is the first time I think we're truly seeing the CBA put in action, and beyond just Paul George. Like even look at a guy like Klay Thompson or some other options where teams are just being very more strategic and careful. Where in past years it's just kind of a look of, well, they'll find a way to figure it out. It's not as much maneuvering as was possible in past years there. And by the way, Daryl Morey and the Sixers do say thank you for those draft picks. By the way, as those are in possession of the Sixers there for a lot of what you're talking about. The main guy before actually I get into this guy here. So part of the reason why I'm optimistic about this from a Sixers perspective, you mentioned that Paul George can be the 3 here. I think that's absolutely true. And I also think the best way to build a trio is exactly how the Sixers have built it. You have a true guard in Tyrese Maxey, a true wing in Paul George, and a true big man in Joel Embiid there. And I also think like while I can see why I would rub people the wrong way, kind of the Paul George mentality in quotes, to me, I'm pretty intrigued by that because there's always been this kind of underlying passive aggression here in Philadelphia for all of Joel Embiid's pairing. It felt that way with Jimmy Butler of a who's the guy taking the last shot. With Ben Simmons, there was this always like stylistic clash for how these guys want to play. Even with James Harden, there was some clash for how you want to play basketball and like Joel didn't love being a pick and roll type big man, which is what obviously James Harden excels at and so much isocentric. So I almost am like bought in on this fact that Paul George is not going to be a guy that causes a fuss or is too commanding. And my other point to bring in that I know you can relate to from a Clippers fan, this is a clear upgrade over Tobias Harris, that I cannot exaggerate how much better Paul George is than Tobias Harris. And just that upgrade right there, I do think changes this team. So what would you say to all of that?
Definitely does. I love Tobias Harris personally. Well, I don't know if Sixers fans don't, but I had about a season overall with him as a Clipper, and he was really good in the beginning of that 2018-19 season. Granted, the expectations were nowhere, but Paul George, the only thing I'll say is yes, I totally agree with you. I think that the trio is perfect. The big wing guard combination, that's ideal. The thing I'll say is when Paul George goes through one of his inevitable shooting slumps because he only shoots jumpers and does not get any easy baskets.
Yeah.
And when I mean easy baskets, he'll still get some open threes, but I mean like nothing inside the paint, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
when he has one of those stretches, he could blame it on I'm not getting the ball enough. That's the only thing I'll warn you about. But
Okay.
that's about it. You're right about I just think he'll be easier to work with in that third option role than some other stars in the league. Like that's why I think Paul George, even with the lack of production sometimes and the excuses that he makes and all this, what makes him, I think, such a coach's dream is like he can do a lot of things well. Like he can work. Any guy that can be in movement and can work quickly off the catch and is that much of a threat off the ball is very fun for coaches. The thing with Paul George is don't expect him to do that much spontaneous cutting, like just out of just him seeing something and going. He's a guy that only cuts really in sets. He literally said on his own podcast he can't back cut. But it's funny because after he said that, he had the most back cuts of any Paul George season with the Clippers last season with like, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6 off the top of my head. So just don't expect him to cut spontaneously, but as a coach, man, that's a luxury to have someone like that. Much better than Tobias Harris coming off screens and all that stuff. And it's just, it's silky smooth with PG. When it looks good, I mean, you're going to be in awe of what he can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not going to get into the too big of ripping Tobias Harris, but kind of my outlook on him is so sick of the pump faking out of open 3-pointers to just work your way into a tough contested two. He's a guy that, like, while you see the smoothness in Paul George, there's none of that in Tobias, that it's very much, even when things are cooking, it's like hitting fadeaways over outstretched arms type action, that type of thing. And my full outlook for him as a player, I feel bad just killing the guy, but he's not good enough to be a primary creator on a team. And he's also not skilled at any of the supplementary skills, that he's not a good enough rebounder. He's not a good perimeter defender. His hips are super stiff when trying to slide with guys. And I've never seen him come up with like a loose ball or any of these types of things. And like, obviously we're not asking Paul George to do this, that I think he's here to be like a key scorer, a guy that is more in that role, that there will be the dirty work guys on this team, as he likes to put it. But I do think like the Tobias Harris experience was brutal here. Curious, like you said, it's pretty positive, the remembrance of Toby in LA.
Yeah, we traded him after he made a game winner against the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah, I do remember that. That was the peak. That was what sold it for coming to Philadelphia. So I do remember that. But yeah, I think 1 year Tobias Harris I would feel much better about than the 5.5 that he spent here in Philadelphia. Just wore out the welcome a little bit. The guy that I'm curious if he's wearing out the welcome in LA right now is James Harden. That was kind of the first domino that started a lot of this. So we remember James Harden opting into that player option, wanting to force his way to Los Angeles last year, ultimately got the job done for that draft capital, and Nico Batum, Robert Covington, KJ Martin, Marcus Morris, a little bit of package of guys there. Now that we're revisiting this a little bit in the future, how do you feel about that deal going down? And what's your outlook for James Harden heading into this year?
I would say my takes on James Harden, or like my feelings on James Harden, are a minority amongst Clipper Nation, because I think
Okay.
Harden had a pretty good regular season last year, and in the playoffs, he actually was like arguably our best player, which was sad. So people don't really have a right, and he's said all the right things. He took a team friendly deal, so Clipper fans don't really have a reason to dislike the guy. I, as you know, you said in the beginning of the show, I love basketball. I watched every single playoff game outside of games 3 and 4. You guys played the Nets 2023. Yeah, when you guys swept
Yeah.
them. Those are
Yeah.
the only 2 playoff games I can think of that of James Harden's entire career that I haven't watched. Like I literally have
Wow.
watched every single playoff, not because I care, because I literally just watch every playoff game.
Mhm.
So I'm of the belief that James Harden's not going to win a ring. Like I'm that harsh. Like, I'll go out and say these things, but I'm going to say about Paul George too. He's not winning anything. So
Okay.
I'm very harsh. I'm going to be honest. And I just think it's not even harsh. I think it's respecting how hard it is to win rings. You're a
Yes.
Philadelphia 76ers fan. I'm a Clipper fan. We haven't seen our teams win a championship in our lives, right?
Right.
Like it's hard to win rings. It's really, really hard. So the guys that have such big roles in winning rings, you got to give them a lot of credit, man. That's not hard, because a lot of it's like, how many things are you doing to hurt a team? A guy that's just missing shots, but he's doing all the other things well, it's easier to win with guys like that. Whereas with Harden, if his pick and roll game is not going, his ISO game's not going, where else is he helping you? He might get you a couple good shots with his passing, but it's just not enough because of what he's taking away.
Right.
I think Paul George actually is one of the more decent stars with that. Like he can have a 3 for 12 game and still be decent. But I will say this, his effort for the level of caliber player that he is does wane when his shot's not falling. Like he can, you know what I mean? So you guys are going to not be very impressed with his defense for the reputation that he has. But I'll tell you this, it'll probably still be better than Tobias Harris. And that's an upgrade.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Harden, my closing thoughts on Harden are, I don't enjoy watching him play. I think he's fantastic at what he does, but I don't believe that he's going to win a championship, especially as a second option, as you guys know. So that's how I feel about him. But I'd say they're a minority in Clipper Nation. And so far, he's said all the right things and he's doing pretty well.
Yeah, that's a lot of good thoughts there. And I'll say, like, I have zero hate in my heart for James Harden. I respect James Harden, and I kind of look at it as it was absolutely worth a shot here. Like, let's not rewrite history and forget that we moved on from Ben Simmons to James Harden, which you absolutely at least increased the chance at a championship. And it did not work as a co-star to Joel Embiid, but it was worth trying to see if it did. Now, my overall like cautionary tale to Clippers fans right now is I do think, like, for the people running victory laps about like James not getting his contract and what a big deal that was, that ultimately was the breaking point here in Philadelphia, I wouldn't quite cash that check just yet, because I do think he's going to put up some unreal numbers this year, particularly in the games in which Kawhi is not there. Then he's going to opt out and hit free agency again next year. And I think you guys are having some difficult conversations in those shoes. And the other things that I'll say about James as a basketball player, even when he's not the best player, which he obviously wasn't here in Philadelphia and isn't in Los Angeles with Kawhi there, I still think he ultimately decides whether or not you win or lose just about every game that he's in, because he is such an engine, because he's so ball dominant that, the ball is going to stick in his hand and you're going to rely so much on those step back threes that even with him being a number 2 or a number 3, I think he dictates whether or not that team wins far more than even guys slightly more talented than him. So, bit of a cautionary tale there.
That's absolute facts. I mean, that's kind of my issue with players like this. And it's
Yeah.
like when you look at the Clippers this past season, the 26-5 stretch, I'm gonna keep it real. Yeah, Kawhi and Paul George were rolling, but that's because James Harden was rolling. And
Yeah.
he was an offensive creator that we haven't had since CP3. So we really haven't had someone like that. And then when we hit that slump, it's because James Harden couldn't get by anybody anymore. And the step back three, he hit a shooting slump. So as we knew, I mean, Sixers fans told me, but I've obviously watched. So like when the step back three is not falling now, it's different than when he was in Houston, when we could blow by whoever he wanted. So yeah, I totally agree with that, and I don't feel comfortable with that. But it is what the Clippers have done, and that's the tough part about being a loyal team fan is like you can disagree with so many of the things the franchise is doing. Like, dude, we're talking about having multiple guys with domestic violence cases potentially next season, and I'm like just indebted to this team because it's my loyalty, and I'm not the type of person that'll ever switch teams, but it's weird. This is why player fans exist.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess to put a little positive spin on a lot of this talk, let's talk on a guy that we can agree on and both love. Nico Batum heading back to Los Angeles. So Batum came over as a part of that James Harden trade, a guy that I don't think there was a ton of expectation when he first came in the deal. I know there was a fondness for Robert Covington, who obviously started his career in Philadelphia, Marcus Morris being a Philly guy, KJ Martin, a little youth, and the draft picks truly being the prize of the trade. But Batum proved his worth throughout last year, that there were nights where I think consistently throughout the Sixers season, he was their third or fourth best player, that he was a terrific entry passer to Joel. He was a guy who shot the ball well from three, came alive in that playing game, which was super important, and they do not win that game without him there. Obviously, this has much more to do with family and him wanting to live out in LA, and we have to respect that from a Sixers angle. The guy was a true professional while he was here. So shout out to Nico Batum, and how excited are you to have him back?
So excited, man. I mean, he's one of the most fan favorite Clippers I think we've ever had in our time in Los Angeles. Part of that 2021 team that broke the second round curse. I mean, you guys are going through a little bit of a second round curse right now, but I'm not going to call it a curse with a team that has rings, no matter how far back it was. We literally had never done it. It felt like it was impossible, but Nicholas Batum was one of the reasons why we got past the hump. And, that next season too, when Kawhi had missed every game because of the ACL tear and Paul George missed 51 games, he was part of the reason we have won 42 games with our best scorers being Reggie Jackson and Marcus Morris. So the guy is just loved, and I'm so happy to have him back because we really missed that point of attack defense that he still provides. I mean, it was amazing watching him guard Brunson some of those games. Like, yeah, he got cooked here and there, but like, come on, like a guy at that age moving like that against Brunson, like it was incredible. So I'm so excited to have him back. The only thing that just kind of sucks is, missed 25 games last year for you guys. Wow, in 2023, he only missed 4 games. Okay, it was the season before. He missed 23 games for us in 2022. So he's had his fair share of he's out here and there a little frequently for my liking, but he's older, so it's expected. I think it's just going to be a good depth piece to have back. And man, I am excited to have him back.
Yeah, absolutely. And another guy you nitpicked from the Sixers roster, who I think nobody's going to miss quite as much here in Philadelphia, is Mo Bamba. What's your expectations for Mo Bamba on the Clippers?
I don't have much because it's weird, and I would like to hear some more insight from you. Actually, Mo Bamba, I remember the hype around him at Texas, and then he obviously had a song came out about him and he went crazy. But I've never seen him play good basketball in the NBA. I've seen the idea of him, he'll make a couple pick and pop threes. I'm like, oh, okay, Mo Bamba. But overall, I've never seen him make a big impact where I walk away thinking he's a good basketball player. He's going to have a career in this league. So my expectations are nowhere. But I'll say this: the idea of Mo Bamba is better than what Mason Plumlee is right now. And Mason Plumlee's just washed. He's done. Doesn't protect the rim, doesn't space the floor. He's a good finisher on the basket. I just think the idea of Mo Bamba not being potentially the finished article yet is worth taking the small contract. But let me ask you, what was he like?
Yeah, I think that's fair. He's a theoretical basketball player for sure, and it is worth rolling the dice on. I'll preface all this by saying, like, I've heard nothing but really good things about Mo Bamba as a locker room guy, a human being, like very involved, very like well-spoken guy that like everyone loved within the locker room. But as far as on the court, he's very like the weirdest part about it is the dude's got about an 8-foot wingspan and a 9'6" standing reach. And the two skills that he struggles the most at are rebounding and shot blocking, which are pretty important skills for a backup big man there that you want. The frustrating part about Mo Bamba for me is essentially like how impactful he was on games was more or less decided for whether he knocked down his 3-point attempts. That he did get like 2 pick and pop 3-pointers per game. That when he hit those, it felt like, okay, these were decent Mo Bamba minutes. When he missed, that just like was non-existent. What did he bring to the table? And I just find it weird that like that's kind of the what you're going off for a guy who's your backup center there. So I like Mo. He certainly was brought in. He was a guy that Joel liked, that they trained together with Drew Hanlon. And we also remember the best game I've ever seen Mo Bamba play was when he was with the Magic, where he knocked down, I believe, 7 3-pointers right in Joel Embiid's face in that game. Basically earned his contract that night. But yeah, I don't think you should have very high expectations for what he's actually going to bring on the court.
Yeah, the thing is that the idea that Clipper fans like is that we haven't had any big that could pick and pop for basically 3 years. But Serge Ibaka, that was a very like short-lived period with the Clippers. He got injured basically right away. So outside of Serge Ibaka, you'd have to literally go back to like, I don't even know. Like, I legitimately might have to go back to Lob City to think of the last time we had a pick and pop because Montrezl Harrell wasn't that. So yeah, like Mo Buckets, 2017. Like, so it'll be interesting just the idea of that, especially with Harden. He's going to get a bunch of open threes.
Yeah, definitely. And he will capitalize on those. And Harden will even find a way to use him as a pick and roller because he's particularly excellent at that. Harden is there, and Bamba's big enough where he can make it work. So I think it's worth a swing, but not a guy that would get my hopes up too high for. I will say, talking to you a little bit throughout this, it does feel like the anger has subsided a little bit in the Paul George side of things. So I kind of wanted to ask, what was the level of like betrayment felt for this guy? I've definitely seen all the quotes of he wanted to retire in LA, and I personally believe that he was going to, that this was all just to drive up his price. But what is the level of animosity towards Paul George?
It's extremely high. I mean,
Okay.
I think hopefully in 15 years, if he doesn't have a ring anywhere, we'll look back and say, man, he still helped us get to the conference finals for the first time ever. But Kawhi Leonard basically, blackmailed us with that whole, I'm going to go to the Lakers unless you guys get a star for me to join this team with. And so we literally traded the farm. Like Kawhi essentially is forcing the Clippers' hand. I don't blame the organization at all. You have a chance to get Kawhi Leonard after winning a championship, and you're a franchise with no rings and that people still don't fully take seriously. So it was a huge gamble. We traded what ended up being a 30+ point per game score consistently, SGA, and a bunch of picks. Essentially, we traded our whole future for Paul George. He goes out in the bubble and gets his Clipper career started horrifically. Like, what a terrible first year to have is the way he played in the bubble. And then he gets rewarded with a $176 million contract when he was already on a solid contract from the Thunder. It's not like he was a free agent or he had one more year. Pretty sure he had 2 more years. But if he did have 1 more year, still getting rewarded after 176 million is getting rewarded 176 million after playing that bad in the playoffs is crazy. But he won the fan base over and everybody liked him for 2 years after that, after the conference finals. And then 2022, some people were saying he's the Clipper GOAT just for getting us past the second round.
Wow.
And then these last 2 seasons, I think the inconsistency really started showing more. The inconsistency became more consistent the last 2 years. You know what I mean? Whereas 2021, yeah, he'd have some bad games here and there for a star, but I wouldn't go as far as to say he's extremely inconsistent. But he is for a star, especially like mainly for a star. He'll still get his 18 points very easily, which I know with Sixers fans are like, yes, 18 points. That's not Tobias Harris. We'll take that. But the way you go ahead.
Once again, coming off the last time we saw Tobias Harris on the floor, he scored 0 points in an elimination game 6. So 18 sounds wonderful.
Yeah, that part. I mean, Paul George is definitely an upgrade. I mean, I definitely think it's going to help the Sixers. But as far as the vitriol and all this with the Clipper fans, I mean, he kept on saying, we're going to get it right. We're going to get it right. And he just sticks his foot in his mouth with these comments. The thing about it is he's played so poorly the last 2 seasons for what we need from him. Games that Kawhi doesn't play, he won't even put up 20 shots. Like, there's no urgency, like, to go get the ball. And then these kinds of things just really piss us off. And then after all this, he has 19 points in the playoffs. He did the Slam magazine cover last summer that he's going to be back on his bully. He was awesome for 2 months. And then he's just like, another thing is, after the bubble, he said that he needed the ball in his hands more, that he was being used too much off ball. And then now recently, last year, he's going publicly advocating for Westbrook to get a point guard to get the ball out of his hands. Like, it's just insane. And then we get James Harden. Every single move that we've gotten all his friends, Reggie Jackson, John Wall, Russ, now even James Harden. He's had a say in all these moves. And then when it doesn't work out particularly great, he's talking about we miss Nico and Rocco. Like, dude, all this stuff. So I figured he would take a pay cut because Kawhi took a pay cut to end his career here and do what he set out to do. Based on Paul George's delusion, he should think that they still have a chance to win a championship here in LA. Yeah. And he didn't. So he took the money, and I don't blame him for the money, but you can't blame fans for being upset because it's not like guys have never taken pay cuts before.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one clip that was particularly fun to me from the Paul George podcast was him basically talking about, like, this isn't James's fault at all, but we just had to trade all these guys to get James. Now we really miss him. But again, it's not James' fault at all that it happened. He was great here. It was kind of funny to me, but it's weird in this modern environment, and we live this with Pat Bev and the Pat Bev podcast. It's kind of frustrating when these guys and Paul George and Pat Bev obviously in different areas as players as far as their impact in the game. Personally, I'll say it rubbed me the wrong way. Sometimes like Pat Bev talking out of his range of impact a little bit versus Paul George, slightly different story here. But do you think that rubs people the wrong way of him going on his own pod and talking about him basically letting the team down at points?
Yes, except he says everything but I let the team down. That's the problem. Okay. So that's how I feel about Paul. Again, though, I'll always thank him for some of the memories. There weren't that many. I'm just going to make it very clear. There were not that many, but 2021 was special, like franchise changing, a moment I'll never forget. And then I've been at every single playoff game you ever played for the Clippers, like at home.
Wow.
I went to every single one, and it was still special when Paul George had it going to see that guy on a consistent basis. And I started to get accustomed to it, seeing him consistently and embracing him as one of ours. So I still think he's one of the best Clippers of all time. The bar isn't very high, but he is. And I wouldn't say I wish him nothing but the best, because I wish him to absolutely lose every game. But
fair.
It's okay.
All right, a couple more I got for you. A little bit different direction here. What is, from a Clippers perspective, the outlook on the Oklahoma City Thunder? Because respectfully, they got pantsed you in a way that is one of the worst trades that I've ever seen as it aged. How does that feel looking back on it?
Awful. It really hurts, man. The fact they have all our picks is just so sad. If we traded him for Paul George, we lost for nothing. But I mean, I think the way the Clippers in the last couple of days have tried to retool the roster is not bad, but like we literally still lost Paul George for nothing.
Yeah.
And we didn't even get picks back. So that's just very unfortunate. SGA, I think that may be the toughest thing. It's, if anything, it makes me more bitter at Kawhi, because how many stars make a free agent move but demand another star arrive with them? That sounds like only one other player in NBA history. And I'm not even, you know who it is. And we're trying to be, he didn't want to go play with him. He literally didn't want to go play with LeBron. And now he's doing that. So it's just, why don't you go to LA? You had a 48-win team right there. You had a rising rookie who you just didn't watch enough of, Kawhi. I'm sorry, you just didn't watch. So, which one of the weirdest things about Kawhi that he said that he doesn't really watch ball like that. He just watches film, like when he's asked to, which I found surprising, because he has a very high basketball IQ, and his knowledge of NBA history when he talks about it seems pretty strong for a modern player. But that's very weird to me.
Yeah, he's an odd cat, Kawhi. Is there any, the level of animosity towards him? Where does this fall on the scale of things? Because to be perfectly clear, from my eyes and from a little bit of afar, I would attribute a lot of the shortcomings of them not getting over to the hump more to do with Kawhi than anything, and most of that being injury based. But the reality being, to compare him to a guy like Joel Embiid, I at least very much respect the fact that Joel is out there trying and competing as much as his body will physically let him. We just straight up don't see Kawhi for stretches of time. So what is that like, and what are those feelings?
It's very frustrating. I want to ask you this too before I continue my answer. How much does Joel Embiid, being such a public ambassador of the Sixers and embracing that face of the franchise and pumping up the crowd and all that, the process, and he really is one of the best players to the crowd in
The
that
showman.
in the NBA right now. He really does embrace that. So like, how much does that make you less frustrated with those shortcomings as a fan?
It's a part of it. He certainly like embodies this era of Sixers basketball. Like he's been one of the most patient superstars, so that definitely helps with a lot of it. And I also think like the part with Joel that to me definitely stands out, and I think a lot of people feel this way. Even when you get Joel not at 100%, like his ability to just protect the paint and be like a defensive anchor helps the team so much that you night and day see the difference when he's on the floor or when he's not, even when he's not playing at his best. So like that defensive floor that he sets for this team always gives this team a chance. So I think like that part of it helps as well. But him being like this era of basketball is definitely a part of it, which I could see not feeling with Kawhi.
Yeah, and just like he's shown his loyalty. He's stayed through
Yeah.
different iterations of the Sixers team. He's embraced that he's the guy that wants to lead them back to something. And he's just, as you said, he's a showman. Kawhi is not about all that stuff. He doesn't
Yeah.
love that stuff, whereas Embiid likes it. But I think if you go on Twitter, you would see no animosity. But even though Kawhi is probably, I would say, most Clipper fans' favorite player, I don't know. Terrence Mann is very well liked.
Crazy,
Very
by
well
the
liked. Very well
way.
liked.
Mr. Untouchable as of last year.
Yeah, I think Harden wasn't the best pairing for him. And maybe we do obviously overvalue him a bit. But the problem was we, based on 2023, Nico Batum didn't look like a better point of attack defender than Terrence. So the front office is thinking is we're not only losing a fan favorite that can plug and play anywhere, we're losing a guy that is probably our that most used point of attack defender. And so I don't think Terrence is a guy that can be the best point of attack defender on a championship team, but he's one of the most well-liked Clippers. As far as Kawhi, there are a lot of Clipper fans that are sick of this, that are done with him. It's not enough to get him booed, but let's just say those MVP chants aren't as easy to start these days as when he first got here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I got two more questions for you here. Similar questions, but phrased slightly differently. For starters, if you're starting a basketball team from scratch right now, would you rather it built around James Harden or Paul George?
Oh my God. From scratch, I'm a Paul George guy, just the way he plays basketball. I don't like a guy that dominates the ball like James Harden, but I will tell you this. If every single player that you surround them with is going to be worse than Paul George or James Harden, if they're going to be the best player on your team, the team with Harden will be better.
Okay. That's an interesting response there. I would ride with Paul George from the standpoint of it being a baseline, and that's just the archetype of player that I think you need to find. That like you make a strong point about catering to James Harden's needs for sure. Now, the second part of that I want to swing into, knowing what we know in the context of the situation, which player do you think is more likely to actually win a ring at this point in each of their careers?
That's a really tough question, honestly, because I'm so out on both of them winning a ring. As crazy as this sounds, if health broke your way and health broke our way,
Mm-hmm.
I have more confidence in Kawhi than Embiid in the playoffs because we've seen
Wow.
it. We've
Wow.
seen it.
Sure.
Embiid,
Believe me, we know. Yeah.
his best, I'm just talking out here, but like I think his best series was what, the Raptors series? Is that the
Yeah.
best series? Okay, so
Yeah.
like no one besides Sixers fans is going to remember that. Like, you know what I mean? It's a first round series against the Raptors, whereas Kawhi Leonard, come on, this guy averaged 30 in a playoff run all the way to a title. That was so long ago, but in 2021, this guy was averaging 30 points on 60% shooting at one point of the playoffs on jumpers, essentially all day long. And then in 2023, it was only 2 games, but this guy was outplaying KD like in the playoffs in front of everybody. So my problems with Kawhi almost are nothing basketball related, but because when he's out there, so you know what, I'm just gonna give James Harden the edge because of the way he played in the playoffs this season with Paul George. But even though I'm saying that, I would give the Sixers a better chance to get the health break, and you have 3 stars. So I think you guys are close to winning a title right now. But if you had to make me just pick one, because I don't think either are going to win, but if you had to make me just pick one, if that actually wins, I would think that the Kawhi James Harden pairing would do it first. But you guys are a better team. I know it sounds contradictory, but you guys are the better team.
Yeah, interesting takes all around there. I am pumping my excitement on the Sixers a little bit until this roster is complete. As of now, just 8 guys on roster, and one of those being Paul Reed, who seems destined to be traded or released at this point. So still a lot of work to do from Daryl Morey's end there, but I do like a lot of what you put there. I'm still buying in that. I do think like this was the best option that the Sixers could have taken by bringing in Paul George. I understand he's not perfect, but I still think like, would you still say he's comfortably a top 25 NBA player at this point?
Definitely not comfortably.
Definitely
Definitely
not
not.
comfortably.
Definitely not
Really?
comfortably. No.
All
I
right.
mean, here's what I think though. Who else you got on this team? Kelly Oubre.
Yep.
Um,
Then a lot of young guys. A lot of right now the starting lineup seems to be Maxey, Oubre, Paul George, Embiid, and whoever they're going to find for that fourth, which seems to be some variation of Haywood Highsmith, Dorian Finney-Smith, Caleb Martin.
Dorian Finney-Smith would be great. I mean,
Yeah.
and off the bench, no campaign anymore.
Could be back. I believe he's going by Terry Johnson these days based on his arrest record there. But it seems like trending towards one of Kyle Lowry or campaign will be back.
What's up with Robert Covington? He's a free agent. He was on expiring and he wasn't healthy.
Yeah, he had a bone bruise early on and never came back. I think he's probably back on a minimum.
That would be
Which I
good.
would
I mean,
like.
you can get a healthy Rocco. That's a solid player off the bench, in my opinion. Always has been.
Yeah, I love Rocco, and I honestly thought he was good before he got hurt, that he played well for the Sixers team. So I am optimistic on them filling out a roster. So it was good to get a little bit of perspective on this. So any last moves that you're waiting on for the Clippers? I know there's the Miles Bridges stuff, a couple other guys going down. Anything that you're particularly hoping for?
Yeah, getting a four, getting a bigger forward. And the thing is, we'll see what happens with the Westbrook trade. What are we going to get for him? Like a second rounder or something? But I'm also curious to see who the Clippers want to have at that backup point guard spot. Is it going to be kind of a sometimes Chris Dunn, sometimes Bones Highland thing, or is one of them, or is Bones Highland going? It would be kind of sad because Clipper fans have been really begging to see him just get a consistent role as a bench spark plug point guard. But that's it. There's not much we can do. You know, it's taxpayer mid-level stuff, and we're using that money. And yeah, we'll see. It's going to be a team with a solid floor, but it's nowhere near a championship team right now to me.
Yeah, very fair, very fair. And Chris Dunn is the truth, by the way. Big fan there.
Yeah, Chris Dunn, yeah. But I'll say this again: if no matter what seed we get, if Kawhi shows up in the playoffs and he's healthy, like we're dangerous. Like it's no doubt about that. That's why I gave that answer about the championship breaking our way. Just because if we're talking fairy tale land, I think that Kawhi is he's reliable in the playoffs.
Yeah, all great points there, and we'll see what happens. So 2 teams waiting on the best health risk there, or hopefully the best of luck in the health department. But to Mr. Dime Dropper here, I appreciate you for hopping on with me. Everybody that is tuning in, appreciate you guys. Make sure you are liking, subscribing wherever you are listening. For those of you on radio, get ready for Green Legion Radio coming to you right after this. For those of us here on Pick Swap Media, we will be talking to you next time. But Dime, any last words for you for what you got coming up?
No, man, just you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Dime Dropper Pod, but subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's where you get all my content. And I always talk about every team at some points throughout the season, before the season, and then in the postseason. So obviously I'll be talking about Paul George a lot this season. So check that out, and a bunch of LA sports content and NBA history content too. I'll be making videos on the old school Sixers very soon at some point.
Absolutely. That's awesome stuff. And I hate to do one more question to you, but it did pop to my mind. And while I have you in front of you, Mikal Bridges versus Paul George, who is a better basketball player?
I'm still going with Paul.
Okay, good. I'm on the same page there. To me, I think that one is pretty comfortably clear, but I've gotten some pushback from Knicks fans, so they want to get the perspective there. But that is why we have him on, ladies and gentlemen. Shout out to Dime Dropper for joining us today. Appreciate each and every one of you guys tuning in. I'll be talking with you next time right here on Pick Swap Media, as well as Fox Sports The Gambler.